Hey everyone, this is Will. Welcome to the first Google Hangout on As We May Thunk. And I should say, because hopefully we won't have too many, because part of the reason that I mentioned doing this is to try to get away from Google Hangouts, because Google Hangouts has some issues for trying to do things like live coding and online learning, I think. So hopefully we can move to some technology that would be a little better for serving our purposes. Anyway, welcome to the first Hangout. And Michael Ballantyne is the person that I've been organizing with this. Michael, you want to say hi?
Hello.
Yeah, so I can have the cameraman turn open. Okay, cool. So let's see. So basically, we've got a little manifesto type thing that that we wrote up that we can talk about. I'll just tell you up front that I'm nursing a cold right now, so there may be some sneezing and sniffling of noses and blowing of noses and things like that. Michael, would you be so kind as to read the little manifesto we have for the As We May Thunk website?
If I can find it, it's on your website, right?
Yeah, it's webbird.net.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'll drop it in the IRC too. If anyone needs a reminder where it is. So you want me to read this?
Yeah, sure.
Like the longer version?
Sure.
Okay. Historic computing systems like NLS Augment, Smalltalk, and Lisp machines featured interactive programmable environments that mix information organization and software development. Modern computing feels like it's lost that spirit. These kinds of integrated systems for interactive programming, information organization, and collaboration, which we think should be intimately related, could be reinvented using what we've learned about modern research in programming languages, networking, and cryptography. We're interested in questions like what tools would allow us to best create, capture, and investigate ideas, what should a modern interactive programming environment look like, and how can online collaboration learning most fully take advantage of the unique properties of online media. To explore these ideas and directly experiment with new kinds of online collaboration, we're starting weekly online get-togethers. We invite others interested in these topics to join us. These will include discussion of ideas, exploration of current and past computing systems, demos of software and languages, guests, and most critically, collaborative hacking to build prototypes of new solutions in the area. And this is our kickoff. So, yeah, that's it.
Yeah. All right, thanks. So basically, Michael and I have been thinking a lot about systems we've used in the past or read about. So I've used things like Emacs, I've used HyperCard, I used a really amazing IDE called Think Lightspeed Pascal back in the 80s, which was in some sense maybe the first modern IDE, and it was still better than anything I've ever used since. We've also been playing around with Smalltalk systems, I've been fortunate enough recently to talk with Tom Knight, who was creator of the Lisp machine, or co-creator of the Lisp machine. And reading lots of things by Alan Kay and folks like that. And one thing that we see over and over again is sort of the interactivity of some of these systems, where in something like Smalltalk system or Lisp machine system, you had access to code going all the way down. If you're running an application on a Lisp machine, or if you're running an application on an Alto at Xerox PARC, that code in the application was available to you in either Lisp or Smalltalk, and you could modify that while the program was running and have it immediately take effect. So, going all the way down to the operating system, you could change the operating system while it was running. It may be a dangerous thing to do, but it gave you a tremendous amount of power. And Emacs has a little bit of this feel, so you can, basically update code in Emacs as it's running, change the editor as it's running. If you've got a command, you can find the code behind command. You can look at that code, you can change it, so forth. With the Emacs macros, you can reify the macros, take a bunch of keystrokes, reify that, turn that into Emacs list code, give that code a name, change the code, so forth, and then define a function that does that code and add it to your Emacs file and so forth. And there are other systems, obviously things like HyperCard. If you've used HyperCard, that was a very dynamic system, and it blurred the boundary between programmer and non-programmer in a really cool way. Another thing that was really cool about something like HyperCard, and sort of the other half of the theme that we're interested in, was that HyperCard was a way to let you organize knowledge also, right? So you could build these HyperCard stacks that let you organize information, but also have active components to it, code. And it kind of sucked you into programming because you didn't have to know much programming. You could just kind of drag buttons in, things like that. But the more you wanted to know about programming, the more control you had, the deeper you could go. There are also things like TiddlyWiki, which is something Michael introduced me to, that we've been using to sort of organize research notes and so forth. And over time, we just started noticing that there are these cool tools, and people like Brett Victor, people like Alan Kay, obviously, been talking for a while about. Well, Brett Victor's been talking for a while. Alan Kay's been talking for decades about the importance of interactivity. And there are also work like Lighttable or Eve, like Chris Granger and so forth. So I think a lot of people are interested in these sorts of ideas. But one of the things we were thinking about was, well, it'd be really cool, since we're trying to learn everything we can about existing systems, if we shared that online. And if we kind of looked at these two themes, because we think that having a very interactive system and having something where you can organize information, like research information, research notes, programs you're writing, stuff like that, they should go hand in hand. And we don't feel like we really have tools that do that very well. And so we thought, well, it'd be fun if we could share our explorations of this area with other people, because I know a lot of other people are interested in these ideas. And the other part was, it'd be really cool if we could start hacking and trying to build some of the tools or play around with the ideas that we have in mind. And no better way than to get a group of people together who are interested in programming, or maybe user interface, or ideas of interactivity, or how you manage information, so things like that. Information management is a terrible term, but I'll use that right now. And get people together and start hacking, maybe in small groups, things like that. So in some sense, this could be sort of a matchmaking service where we have people throw out ideas that they're interested in exploring, and find other people that they can program with to try to prototype those ideas or implement those ideas, and then share those with the rest of the group. So part of it is trying to explore what tools are out there, and what things have been done in the past and are being done now, but also to make an impact and start playing around with these and build tools that we ourselves can use. And part of this was from my frustration with doing Google Hangouts for the Mini-Kenron language. I've been doing a number of Hangouts for this logic programming language called Mini-Kenron that I've been working on with other people. And those Hangouts were really cool in some ways, but there were some very serious limitations to using Google Hangouts. And towards the end of those Hangout series, we were talking about, well, what better tools might we use? And that's something I could talk about a little bit is, the things I found frustrating about Google Hangouts. Google Hangouts is great in many ways, but there are a lot of disadvantages too, especially if you want to do collaborative learning or things like that. And one of the disadvantages of Google Hangout is that it tends to focus on one person talking a lot, so I'll try to avoid that. So I guess one question is for the folks who are joining us. First of all, welcome. Glad you joined us. We're just curious, what sort of things, why are you interested in joining us for these Hangouts, and what sort of systems have you played with, or what sort of ideas do you have for systems or interactivity or organizing information or whatever that you've been inspired by or might want to explore? So anyone interested in taking the mic?
I suppose I can take a stab at it.
All right, hold on a second. Who are we clicking on?
This is Matt.
Matt. Okay, go for it.
So I have a couple years of program experience behind me at this point, and actually I stumbled upon this because I watched some of those mini Canran Hangouts after they were posted to YouTube, and I did notice that there was just kind of points where things didn't work well because it's not an environment that lends itself towards interactive coding. It's an environment that lends itself towards, talking to friends from afar. And it does a great job at that, but I think there could definitely be improvements. My experience has been a lot of big IDEs like Visual Studio in the past, and I've noticed that those do really good if you have somebody next to you working on, but they do a pretty poor job if you have multiple people. And recently, maybe 2 or 3 months ago, I moved over to Emacs to give it a shot because I started doing some Clojure development at work, and I found it has some benefits. You can do. It's really great at being reprogrammable, but it's still kind of hard to do proper sharing and collaboration with somebody who's not in the same room as you. So it sounds like this is a great idea of let's see what we can do to fix that problem.
I have a question about Emacs because I also use Emacs. Does anyone know, are there modes for Emacs for collaborative editing online? There seems like there must be, right?
There's at least a way to do it by using some of the terminal sharing if you're okay with using terminal mode. Not the most secure, but it is a way to do collaborative editing. There's probably a plugin or a package that does it as well, I imagine.
All right, well, cool. Well, thank you. Do you have any specific ideas about things you would like to explore or hack on or play with?
Well, I certainly think that Emacs has a lot of the things that we would want in terms of programmability, but what it seems to be lacking in is proper sharing and collaboration. So if we could maybe take the Emacs model and add in some benefits to those, maybe some video as an option, because that always helps when you can see a face, at least in my opinion, and get some audio as well, where it's the one program. I think it could do better than Tmux, which Greg in the chat just mentioned. That's what it's called.
Yeah, so one thing that's cool about Emacs is that if you're doing live coding, you can have your redevel print loop, your interactive loop for programming a Lisp or Clojure or Scheme or whatever. You can have that in as just a sub window, right? And one thing that we talked about with the Google Hangout, the mini Canran Hangouts, is it might be really neat for people to be able to share their REPLs with other people, right? And you might even have something where it's not even video, it's just voice chat or something like that, but you have some way to share the text, and maybe in your Emacs window or some other window, you could see the REPLs that different people had. So if you wanted to try playing around with some programming, you would see what different people were working on. Or maybe you could share a REPL, or you could have like one window where this is code you want to share with everyone, and then like some sandbox thing where you want to play with it yourself, and you don't want to share that. So it'd be really cool to have something where you could very dynamically and in a lightweight fashion share with other people what you're working on, and then be able to have people see what multiple folks are working on at once. That would be really neat. And that's something that the Google Hangouts technology, for example, doesn't support very well. It's obviously not designed to do it, so it's not fault with Google Hangouts, but that would be an interesting thing you could play with, and maybe you could use Emacs for a basis of that.
And there's something similar to that is with ClojureScript now, it is possible to have a web-connected REPL. I can't imagine that it would be too much code tacked on to let other people connect to that web-connected REPL. So they kind of take an interesting model where the evaluation doesn't happen in the browser, but it happens afar, and then it returns the results to you. But that sounds like it's somewhat close to what we're looking for, at least in the REPL regard.
Cool. Would anyone else like to share what they've been thinking about or would like to explore or been inspired by?
So, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, who is this, first of all?
This is Omar.
Hey, Omar.
So, I mean, I played with a couple of like the symbolics machine and some of these other sort of things that people mentioned. But one thing that I was using, I actually wrote all the code I wrote over the summer. I wrote in Acme, which is the text editor from Plan 9, and it's like super. It doesn't do a lot, but I think it has a lot of interesting interface ideas. For example, it's almost entirely mouse-driven. Like you can't move between lines without using the mouse. And instead of, I'm not sure how I feel about this, but like instead of extending the editor, you just use shell commands for everything. And so it sort of has these like simplicity and consistency properties that I think are very interesting.
Would you be willing to give a demo at some point of what
Sure.
it's like to edit in that?
Yeah. I actually have to head out in like 15 minutes, but at some
Sure.
point, definitely.
Okay, sure. Another time.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, cool. So that's another thing we'd like to do, of course, right? Is that if there's technology you think is interesting or a system you've played with that you think has interesting ideas, if you'd be willing to demo those, that would be great because then, basically we want to steal every good idea, right? Or at least steal interesting ideas, and maybe ideas are underexplored. So yeah, so Plan 9 was, I mean, I know that that's something that's been of inspiration to lots of folks from the Unix background, but you found it interesting even coming from sort of list machine background.
Yeah, I mean, I've been interested, and I think it is sort of in a design space that a lot of people who are interested in this kind of thing don't look at. But I think there are some interesting ideas, and I think the mouse, in many ways, is underappreciated by programmers. People kind of think it's this like kiddie thing, but it is like this direct manipulation device. I think it has a lot of potential.
Yeah, so like I guess the Emacs or VI perspective is you don't want to ever touch the mouse, right?
Yeah.
Keep your hands on the keyboard. So
yeah, and I use Emacs normally as well. So.
Yeah, I'd be very interested in seeing how you use this in practice. And it's definitely a very different idea than the editors that we think of as being very powerful. Can you talk a little bit maybe about your experience with symbolic systems or
Well, that's just something I've sort of been playing around with more recently. I'm just sort of situating, I've heard about like most of the systems that people have mentioned. I played around a little bit with most of them. I don't think I've done serious work in any of the old systems. I have used some of the newer like REPL stuff, and like the Elm. Elm is something I've done some work into. They have this time traveling debugger. But yeah, I was just said that mainly because I wanted to bring up some of the common background before going into the Acme thing.
Yeah, definitely. And Elm is something I would like to learn more about also. That'd be cool. Anyone willing to demo any of those technologies would be great. Especially anything that makes you really excited or feel like, hey, this just makes programming feel fun or exciting. I guess that's part of it, right? It's like when I look back at the tools I really like the Think Pascal thing. I mean, I don't really want to program in Pascal, but that Think Pascal IDE made me enjoy programming in Pascal. It felt like more like Lisp than Pascal. It was kind of weird. It was so interactive. You could type in expressions and immediately evaluate them. It had the best debugger I've ever used. After using that, and everything I've read online is that everyone who's used that system just loved it. So there's something very special about that, and I think that the subsequent IDEs that came out of Semantic lost that. Basically, once Semantic bought Think, it went downhill real fast. But it was a really remarkable system. So that might be something I could give a demo of that maybe. Cool. So anyone else like to share their experiences or inspirations or thoughts?
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yeah. How's it going, Nahal?
Can't hear you. Sorry, I took my earbuds off.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's Nahal. So one thing that I found pretty inspiring, or actually just helpful, was I really like watching people code. I feel like seeing code develop over time is a very effective way of learning something complicated like the internals of microcannon and so forth. So just like we try to record our IRC or the video sessions, a set of tools that would be really interesting to develop would be a way of doing our coding, but somehow organizing it so that you could kind of see you could always go back and kind of see the development of the code quickly. So a lot of the tools I've thought about in the past are centered around visualizing Git histories, and there's tools that people use where they even use Git for sort of work in progress, kind of like taking micro snapshots every few seconds of what they're doing. So that's a little bit more abstract, but just the kind of realm of ideas that seemed interesting to pursue is finding a way of coding or having coding tools that let you really see like very clearly understand how a piece of code was built up.
Yeah, so I guess also there are things like Notch ended up coding, part of Minecraft, I guess, or maybe it wasn't Minecraft, maybe it was his space game. He was coding that on Twitch TV, right? I don't know if you've ever watched that. And there's also a new it's like a live coding TV website for people doing live coding. And I've thought about playing around with that. Has anyone here tried doing anything like that, Twitch or livecoding.tv or any of the other online websites where someone can actually watch you like code up an entire application from scratch? I mean, I guess this is a different thing than the Git, but you still have kind of this effect, right, of watching the entire system developed.
Yeah, I've not seen those websites, so I don't know about them, but
yeah. So Twitch is primarily known as a gaming website. It originally was just in TV, and then it was people live streaming just their life or whatever. And then at some point, people started doing lots of gaming. I think this is basically when StarCraft 2 came out, in like 2009. That was the first really popular esport in the Western world. So people started streaming a lot of StarCraft on that, and then basically they spun it off to be Twitch.tv, and it's still mostly gaming. But there's been, interestingly enough, now there's a creative section, and there's also, in addition to a creative section, there's also a like coding section. So there's an artist I support on Patreon, named Toki, Kelly Toki, and so she has a couple times a week she does streaming on Twitch. So you can watch her draw, and she interacts with chat and stuff like that. And there's also, people doing coding, and mostly I think the Twitch people are coding games, and I think most of the live coding people are coding games or websites. But that is a possible thing to look at. Is watch. It'd be interesting to watch people like code up a real application from scratch instead of just like coding a little bit of an educational or toy example. And also, if you had your idea of having like micro Git transactions, right, where you could see almost every keystroke, and I think there are ways of recording every keystroke, right? So that would be very interesting to see kind of how that works, and I guess you could even do learning on that maybe and try to find ways to optimize that. But that's something I'm really interested in. It's a little bit orthogonal to this, but maybe not entirely. Is how people are using things like Twitch to share what they're doing. I guess it's really no different from the Google Hangouts in a sense, right? Another way for people to communicate.
yeah, I've seen people do live coding of like demos, of like the shader demos, like the tiny little programs. That's pretty cool because those will be tiny programs that they write from start to scratch. But I definitely think that not having it be video. Um, so as as interactive tools are being developed, what I envision is chunks of data being stored historically, so that if you're not there live, you can go back and you can kind of see chunks. And if you have an interactive environment, you can either participate with a bunch of people if you're joining the meeting, but if not, then you can always somehow relive the environment and see kind of what happened. It's like replaying a chess game or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I guess one area where people maybe have explored this already are things like hackathons, or things like where they're trying to code up a game in a weekend or things like that. Does anyone know if folks have also tried recording all the keystrokes that that they entered, or sort of video recording the entire thing or anything like that? I'm sure people have explored that to some extent, right?
I think the game jam, Ludum Dare, people have done stuff like that where they just stream for the whole weekend.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it'd be really cool to see if you could see all the keystrokes they typed in. I guess one thing that you often lose when you're looking at the code is the why, or what the other design decisions were, right? So something where you could maybe have annotated version of the code where you could see, well, here are the alternatives that we had and then we got rid of. So the mini-canron stuff, there are many versions of mini-canron. There are lots of versions of the run interface, for example. And we've traded in different ones, and they all kind of have different trade-offs. It'd be neat to have some version of the code where, if you moused over a certain part of the code, you could see variants and explanations of what the trade-offs are, things like that. That would also be really cool.
Yeah, I think that's more in line of the kind of stuff that I'm interested in, is sort of having not a linear Git history, but a full branch of possibilities of what exactly happened when you're building this piece of software.
Well, to make that comprehensible, that requires the person doing the development to capture a whole lot of extra information, right?
Yeah, and I think it's sort of like if you're going to have literate programming, you would develop your code in a way where there'd be a lot of filtering of unnecessary keystrokes, let's call them, but there'd also be writing your code in a way where you're designing it so that you'd go back and look at it at some point, and you'd have markers in place to help you figure out what you were doing.
Well, I think part of the appeal of the live coding thing is that video is much more like you can just say that this is why I'm doing this as you're typing it, and it's not an enormous amount of overhead.
Well, I can also see a system where you have sort of different channels, right? So maybe you have a video channel, an audio channel, you have the keystrokes the person's entered, maybe text commentary, and maybe commentary from other people, after the fact, going back and putting some annotations, sort of like marginalia in a book or something like that, where they're saying, oh, I was confused by this code, but now I understand how it works because it refers back to this piece or whatever, right? So I can imagine something being layered up, and the person looking at it could kind of choose what aspects they care about.
Could be like an annotated guide to the Linux kernel or something like that. That would be
yeah.
useful.
So there was that famous book, right? It was the Lion's Guide to the Unix kernel, right? That was handed around generation after generation, photocopied. Yeah, that was really cool. And so the thing Nahal mentioned before also was literate programming, which Donald Knuth has advocated. So if you haven't seen that, you might want to look up literate programming in Knuth. He's got systems like CWeb to help support that. But his idea was that you should relax in the evening and drink some brandy or scotch by the fire while reading beautiful code, right? That kind of thing. And so you'd have this exploration or explanation of the code also And the explanation and the code would be intertwined. And Haskell has some support already, right? So some languages have the support, but Knuth had this kind of intricate C-web system to make that possible.
That's my question for things like this is how can we get those results without requiring people to be disciplined, right? Like you sort of want it to be the default that you get something like this. Otherwise, people will always take the easy way eventually.
Yeah, and then afterwards, it takes a real conscious effort to go back and try to mark something up afterwards, right?
Yeah.
So in that context, little bit different, I guess, than the live coding and recording all that thing. But in terms of like trying to keep kind of a wiki of notes and kind of trying to keep that structured and tagged and all that kind of stuff, I've been thinking about it in that context. And there it seems like there are a lot of actions that you do that kind of imply implicit data. If you open pages kind of at a similar time and view them together and things like that, that can imply implicit relationships. So I'm not sure if there's kind of by capturing more information from the ID or something like that, that you could kind of capture more of that automatically.
Yeah, we had talked about this in the context of TiddlyWiki, which is this like lightweight personal wiki system. We talked about how if you opened up different tiddlers, they call them, and worked on them simultaneously, that this would be some information saying that, well, somehow these tiddlers are connected, right? And maybe you do some machine learning or something like that to help the system understand what the connections are. So Michael, you're suggesting that you might be able to do this at the code level or like in a text editor or something like that when you're writing the code. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I mean, so one way to kind of compress down the live coding information a little bit would be to recognize like when you ran it versus other edits, because if you run it, you think you have kind of a complete change. It still doesn't annotate exactly why you made that change, but another possibility would be to say, well, what's changed in terms of the tests and kind of what they do, and can I capture information about the intended functionality from that?
Gotcha. So anyone else have anything that they'd like to share, either as an inspiration or aspiration? Oh, am I checking IRC? No. Let me see. Oh, whoa. Okay. Okay, there's lots of conversation in IRC. So, yeah, does anyone want to summarize that or bring up any of the points? Hey, Brian. How's it going? You got your voice on?
Hello, is this thing on?
Yep.
Wow, modern technology.
Your video is gone now, though.
Yeah, I hit the off button on that.
Okay. Well, welcome. We've just been talking. Okay, so first of all, we've got an IRC channel, which is very active, actually, and fallen way behind. It's on Freenode. It's chatfreenode.net, and it's
yeah. I'm on Freenode all day. What's the channel?
Thunk. So yeah. So Daniel's microphone challenge at the minute because he's at work. Okay, cool. Maybe someone can look at what Daniel's typing and interpret for us. So Brian, basically we've been talking a little bit about systems that we think are interesting from an interactive standpoint or from organizing information and knowledge standpoint, and what sort of things we might be interested in playing with more, or systems that we found inspiring, things we'd want to hack on, and so forth. Do you have any things you'd like to point out with? I remember many years ago you were talking about, was it higher dimensional databases, which I still don't know what that is.
I don't remember that, so that was a long time ago. Yes.
It was a long time ago. So what systems inspire you in terms of interactivity and being able to play around with and change them at runtime and stuff like that?
Play around, change at runtime. Well, to be honest, lately I've kind of been going more down the verification path.
You do embedded systems most of the time now, right?
Well, I do embedded systems now, yes, and lately I've been doing a lot with symbolic execution. And
so a little bit.
Yeah, so symbolic execution is a lot of fun and certainly triggers a lot of the same sort of brain mental pathways as relational programming. I find that about half the time I can predict when a particular symbolic execution of a program is going to blow up and turn into a state space that's going to take longer than I want to complete, just based on intuition from that. And the other half of the time, it completely baffles me. But I'd say lately one system I've been playing with that sort of falls in the category of things which inspire me is Rosette. I don't know if you've looked at Rosette at all, but
I think so. So actually, Michael, were you pointing me towards Rosette?
If you remind me what it is, I'll know if it was something I was pointing well towards.
Okay. So Rosette, let me see if I can paste a link here.
Oh, is that a Mina Torlock system?
Yes.
In
yes,
Racket. Yeah, I know. Okay. Yeah, can you explain what that is? I do remember it now.
Okay, so Rosette, which DuckDuckGo does not know how to find at all, is a sort of a dialect of Racket that is sort of enhanced through the addition of an SMT solver and can perform symbolic execution, but it can also be used to synthesize programs. So in many ways, it's much like working with the relational scheme interpreter, in that you can say, give me a program which evaluates to some particular concrete result. But you can also do so, of course, in terms of symbolic queries. Give me a program that gives me results in a list of two integers, one of which is the other plus one, things like that.
So, can you explain what, just for folks who may not be familiar, what symbolic execution is briefly, and what an SMT solver is? Okay.
So I'll take the second one first. According to Ranjit, who was doing a Liquid Haskell workshop at Strange Loop, symbolic execution stands for symbolic SMT solver stands for satisfiability mumble was what he said. But it's something like satisfiability modulo theories, and it is basically a restricted and automatic form of theorem prover. But it does other things that theorem provers may or may not do for you, such as counterexample generation. So you can usually say, okay, I believe that X is true, or X is some proposition, and it will not only say, no, I'm sorry, that is not true, but will often hand you back a concrete value that falsifies X. Symbolic execution is a technique where you are basically executing a program where some or all of the inputs are basically symbolic, and when you execute the program, instead of then trying to compute a particular concrete result, you are basically building up a set of conditions that may or may not eventually be discharged by your theorem prover. So you could symbolically execute a simple program like plus 1x and get a result back that is basically plus 1x. Or you can do some more interesting things. You could symbolically execute a program that says, assert that x is less than 100, and you will get back a counterexample that says, no, well, if x is 100, this is not satisfiable.
Have you played at all with concolic execution?
Yes, so that's actually something we're doing right now on a project that basically we are using, you could call it concolic execution. I rather hate that name. It sort of nails on a chalkboard. I don't know who picked that name. But we are doing so for comprehensive testing of our IP stack.
And concolic execution is concrete symbolic execution, right?
Right. So the idea is that part of your program is concrete and part of your program is symbolic. And I find it to sort of be a weird distinction because normally when you're symbolically executing, you have at least some concrete elements to the program anyway. So it's not really an all or one situation. But generally speaking, where things get concretized is where you would otherwise have state space explosion. And state space explosion is sort of the old enemy of all of these automatic or solver-based verification techniques, that you run into parts of your program that where you try and handle them purely symbolically would just cause the number of possible state spaces or states to grow combinatorically. So one example of this is in TCP, as part of the TCP header, there's a bit of space for options, and the options can appear in any order, and you can duplicate options and whatnot. Searching through all possible packets and then trying to parse TCP options out of them will explode because the number of possible orderings for TCP options is a factorial, or actually an exponential if you consider duplicated options. And that's not really viable to search through that entire state space. So if you're going to test something like that with a symbolic execution, you need to concretize it and say, well, I'm only going to consider options in this particular order, and maybe I'll do something like test that handling any packet with two options in it gives me the same result no matter which order they're in, and then I'll kind of wave my hands and say, because we've shown this, we're going to now constrain the ordering of the options, and now we have a much smaller state space to search through.
So that almost sounds like a combination of property-based testing.
Yes.
Right.
And in fact, that's explicitly what we're doing in places. We have, for instance, that we can inject any ping or ICMP echo packet into our IP stack as a symbolic packet. So it has any payload and any length up to the maximum length of a packet, and we can get back a symbolic ping reply, and that's all great. It happens, very quickly, but we can then verify also that the length of the reply is equal to the length of the input packet. But when we try and assert that the payload is equal, it causes an explosion. So then we basically fall back to property-based testing and say, we're going to test small packets, large packets, and packets of random length for up to n packets instead of testing the whole thing. And in fact, the way we're doing this is we start with a symbolic packet, and then we start pattern matching to figure out what kind of packet it is. So when we say we're going to test these on these particular packets, it's not that we're generating packets of that length. It's rather that we're matching on all symbolic packets, the entire state space, finding the ones we want, injecting them, and then for the ones that we don't want to work with, we're basically discarding those. So they're basically cuts.
That sounds pretty badass. Are you giving talks about this or anything like that? I mean,
not yet. We just kind of finished the first phase of this work here, and funding willing, phase 2 will pick up sometime next year. And the end result of this should all be open source then. So that's actually, we're doing that with CLI. But I've been screwing a lot around with Rosette lately as well, because it's a pretty interesting system too.
But there are a lot of people in Utah working on gcli, I guess it is.
Okay, I'm not sure if I'm familiar with that variant. I probably have seen it before.
Okay, yeah, I don't. Michael, do you know the difference between CLI and gcli? I don't remember. I just remember everyone's always talking about gcli this and gcli that.
Gcli is just CLI for verifying GPU programs.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So that doesn't apply to us. So we're just using the standard thing.
Okay. Cool.
So that's what I've been having fun with lately.
Okay. Well, so I guess here's a question for folks. How do you keep track of your ideas and what you're working on and so forth? I mean, I used to have giant stacks of spiral notebooks in Indiana in storage. I have probably, well, I know I have dozens, if not hundreds, of these spiral-bound notebooks with ideas going back at least 10 or 15 years for research ideas, programming ideas, and things like that. And of course, like none of them are in a computer. They're not searchable. Every once in a while, I would pick up a yeah. Daniel, can you hold it up again, Daniel? There you go. That's right. And at some point, I just got very frustrated because I've got hundreds of these notebooks, and they're full of bad ideas, but some of the ideas are probably decent. And I don't have any way of searching them. Right? They're all written in my horrible shorthand or longhand, which is unreadable by anyone else. I can't really share them with other people. I can't search them. It's hard for me to, take these ideas or separate it and so forth. And if I have an idea and a topic that I've written about before, I don't have an easy way to combine them and so forth. So, Michael showed me this TiddlyWiki system, which is actually quite cool, and I've been using that. Org mode, yeah. So I've played around with org mode. I'd be interested, Matthew, to see how you use org mode because I don't think I've used org mode in a very sophisticated way. So I'd like to see like an org mode master, like how they actually do things. I've used org mode mostly for like outlines, right? So, but I'd be curious to see how you use it. So the best thing I've used is TiddlyWiki, but yeah, I'm curious to see what other people are using or what thoughts people have. So Matthew uses org mode. If you want to give us a demo of that or talk about that, please do.
I could probably actually do a quick demo. I'm certainly no master, but I've been doing it for a little while now. Now, what I haven't done is tried screen sharing with Google
All right.
yet, so we'll see how well that actually works.
If you crash, you can rejoin.
Okay, I'll go for broke. Did it switch over to this screen?
Oh, there we go.
All right.
Cool.
So, I the way I've started using it recently, maybe.
Can I ask you to make the font a little bit bigger?
If I can remember the command for that. Somebody offhand remember the command for that?
Is this an Emacs?
Yeah.
Control X plus, is that right?
I think so.
My fingers remember.
Yeah, I'll just do a couple of text scale increases.
Yeah, Control X, and then just Control X, and then let go of X, and then plus.
That's weird.
Or I guess it's equal sign. It's not Shift plus. It's not Shift equal.
I'll just increase a couple of times since that seems to work.
Okay, cool. Yeah, sometimes on the video, it depending on someone's resolution, looking at video, but that's plenty big.
All right,
okay,
here
cool.
we go. So let me go ahead and see if I can find my index. So one of the things that's nice about org mode is you can set it up like a wiki with, of course it undid that. So it doesn't matter too much what the details are here, but you can set it up like a wiki so you can put links in. So I have a link to some book status that I've been going through, and so this is a way that I can keep track of where I am in books that I'm interested in reading in the future. And then, like recently, I've been going through the season schemer, and you can do code blocks in line as well. So it's good at keeping track of that sort of thing. I'm training for a marathon in a couple months, and I've been using it to keep track of things like that as well. So most of it seems to be a matter of figuring out what you'd like to do and then figuring out how to do it, because too many people like org mode for there to not have already been a solution done. I find I use it at work as well to keep track of just notes and things. So instead of having the temporary scratch buffer that you normally get, I kind of have a persistent one that I save, and you can keep it all in version control, so it's easy to share with people if they need something in particular. And one of the nice things is those blocks of code that you can do, you can pull into. And then you can go ahead and evaluate the code there. It has some features or works with quite a few programming languages. You can put in little bash snippets and it will run those on your machine. And it really ends up having quite a lot of expressive power once you do things like that. I saw something recently on it as well where somebody does a little bit of literate programming, and it works really well for that as well, because you can just describe what you're trying to do, and then put the code block right afterwards. So you could make a note of factorial, and you could describe what you're going to do, and then have the code underneath in whatever language you want. And then you hit Control-C, Control-C, and if there's code inside there, it will evaluate and put a block underneath that will respond. So it gives you the results right afterwards. So with things like that, you can share the code once it's done, and then have people run through and double Control-C to evaluate it. Which, I mean, a lot of us, when we're reading books, we like to write the code in manually, but others are more interested in running the code and seeing if it works than changing it from there. So this would enable a way where you could give someone the code already finished. They'd be able to run it inline, see the results, and then change it afterwards, which I could see there being a decent amount of value in. But it's also good for capture in general, because it seems to be set up where a getting things done workflow kind of just works with it. So for those of us that try to use that when we can, it's also helpful for that. So it's good at capturing thoughts as they come to mind. There are a couple of apps that sort of make the process a little easier too. You can get org mode on your phone and connect it via SSH or Dropbox in a couple of different ways. So that's kind of the experience I've had with it so far. It seems like it has a couple of the features that we might be looking for in kind of like the future of better interactive programming. The problem is there isn't good ways to share like a session short of something like Tmux. And I think that's something where there could definitely be some good code written to help the world along.
So with your org mode, is this basically a single file? Is it basically like a giant scratch buffer?
Well, you can do a single file. I have quite a few files. So if I dird, so this is underneath the book status directory. So I have a different org file for every book, because that's how I decided to set it up. Then I have a couple of directories. Here I'm focused on the reason schemer. That has some code that I use along with that. And then I have an index as well. So it's a normal directory structure. So it's not individual files, or it is individual files rather. It's not one big file. I found that just works a little bit better for version control and things like that, to have a couple of or multiple files as opposed to just one.
And if you want to share it with someone, you essentially just give them the entire subdirectory?
Yep. As long as you code everything relative in your links, it's happy to work. And it also supports some variant of Markdown. I'm not sure exactly what, but it does a really good job with that. So it's easy to do links and things. If you're already familiar with wiki editing, it's very similar. To do a link is location. Oh, I got matching friends on. So you could do a relative path, and then give it a name for the link, like hello, and then this doesn't exist, so it will say no such file. But if there were to be a file called path, it would go ahead and open it up right there. So since it's relative, as long as you shared the entire directory and everything that was necessary there, it would work perfectly. And imagine if you wanted to go full tilt, you could also use get submodules and then just give them the submodule if you have private things in there as well. But that's been my experience so far.
Yes, and Nahal points out that GitHub also renders Word files automatically.
Yes, it does actually. I'll go ahead and show that off because I have a little GitHub or a GitLab, private GitLab, and once you dig into one of the files, I can just go to index. What's nice is it goes ahead and it shows it off. So this is my personal org mode wiki, and the links happen to work as well, which you just kind of get for free, which is really nice. Because of the way the formatting works, and since I use bigger outlines, it makes the font huge, but you can edit a few of those things to make it work. But it's pretty cool how you just get that for free. So like I can click on my season schemer thing, and since Git does a really good job of showing it, it does code blocks for each of these sections here. So it ends up looking pretty good, I think.
Very cool. Did I hear a cat in the background?
Yes, you did. That is a cat, Peter.
Hello, Peter. Okay, so what are things? So you mentioned one area, right, where like sharing a session doesn't really work unless you do something like Tmux. Are there other things that you can imagine? You know, what else could you imagine? You know, being improved or being better with org mode? Or is org mode the solution to all our problems if we make it a little more?
Well, a lot of people would say as long as you embrace the loving arms, it would be. But I think it definitely has some things that are lacking a little bit. I'm a big fan of text. I think plain text is very powerful, but it does have some limitations when it comes to display for the most part. And you can do a lot to make it look better, but it doesn't look better for free. And a lot of us, I think, would benefit if these tools looked better in general when you're using them. Because while I would say it probably shouldn't be something that keeps people away, I think a lot of people stay away from org mode because it doesn't look very good compared to like Word documents where it's easy. What you see is what you get. You can make things bigger and change fonts, and it's not as involved as it would be with something like this. I think that's one of the big lacking areas that is inhibiting adoption. And another thing is, since it's an Emacs thing pretty much, so you have to use Emacs. You don't have to, but that tends to be the best way. There is a Vim clone for it as well. But it kind of alienates some users that might not be as familiar with, 13 key press commands to open up a new document and things like that. So it can be a little user unfriendly at first. And I think that's something that could definitely use improvement. And after collaboration, which I think would be nice to have, something that I've really been missing is a way to get new people to programming to use these great tools that really aren't great until you've gotten used to them. And I think that's one of the biggest issues we have with our current software for writing software.
All right, very cool. I didn't know that org mode could do all those things.
Yeah,
Thanks.
It's pretty cool. There's Sasha Chun, I think is her name. She does a lot of really cool stuff with org mode. She seems to be the go-to person for org mode facts, and she has a blog out there, so I might link to that as well.
Yeah, thanks. Any links like that? That's one thing I'd like to start doing is collecting links and so forth.
Yeah, I'll go grab those.
Is org mode searchable?
Searchable? Well, you can grep it because it's text, so yes.
Okay.
If that's good enough.
But there isn't an integrated search that kind of makes it easy to jump into those documents in Emacs or things like that.
Yeah, there's something called Helm, or there's a few different options, but if you use like org mode and Helm together, you can pretty much get to anything very quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, now I only have a few files, so I haven't been too worried about navigation, but I can imagine once it gets bigger it being more of an issue.
Yeah.
Speaking of search, Nahal, that's one thing that I've found kind of frustrating with Git. I know there's Git bisect, but I'm someone who does like tons of commits. I might have like 10,000 commits on a project or something, and I want to be able to find code or whatever it is, right? Like in the repo, and it feels like one of the things that Git could really use, or GitHub at least, Git pickaxe, says Bruce. Okay, I don't know what Git pickaxe is. Is that like a search for Git? Maybe that's what I've been looking for.
What do you mean search for Git though? Like beyond just grepping your directory?
Well, it's like, well, I happen to know that at one point in time there was a version of code that had this feature, right, or
So
the
there's something
structure.
called like GitFS that mounts it'll mount your Git repo using Fuse, and there'll just be a directory for each commit, let's say, and it'll be tagged by date and whatever.
So you could do like a find command or something like that on it?
Yeah. So that would work. I mean, it probably wouldn't be that bad because even though you have 10,000 commits, it's probably not a ton of data. But so have you ever played around with Fuse file systems?
I haven't. I don't even know what that is.
A Fuse is like a way of writing file systems in user space. So people will create file systems that let you mount an SSH directory on some machine via SSH. And it'll be as if you have a local mount. And so they do the same thing with Git, but what they expose is just a large number of directories that have, let's say, one directory for each commit. And so from there you can do all kinds of command line stuff. It's one possibility.
Okay, cool. Well, Bruce has a link to code archaeology with Git blog post, it looks like, that talks about Git pickaxe, which I guess is like a search tool also. I mean, basically what I want is something like Google or maybe Hoogle or whatever for my code. So like I'm lazy, I want to be able to, or something structural, right, where I could say, hey, I had some code that had this sort of structure and whatever, find it.
How about find me the last point in time where this would have actually run? And bisect does that, but it's also a little cumbersome to do that.
Yeah, like write like a little expression or something like that. And say, I want this expression to give me this value. So, so you could do that with bisect?
Yeah, but you got to specifically. Well, actually, I'm not quite sure. Actually, can you do that with bisect? I'm not a bisect expert.
Yeah, you can do that. That's basically what it's for.
Right.
You write a script, and then it just runs that script, kind of bisecting your commits until it finds where the executable returns true, returns without an error.
Okay, cool.
So
maybe things exist, but they seem kind of fancy, or it should be like the first thing you learn, not like some advanced feature. Is kind of how I feel. But yeah, I've never actually successfully used Git bisect.
So what is the reason that you're doing so many Git commits? I wanted to ask you that.
I think paranoia based. Actually, okay. So I think there are two things. So I've been using computers a long time, and my first computer that I used was a TRS-80 Coco, like in the late, I guess in 1980. It had no storage at all. I was used to the computers not being very reliable and crashing on me and stuff like that, or applications crash. Well, applications still crash on me, right? Like the Google Hangout, Firefox will crash on me during Google Hangouts like fairly regularly. So I became like very paranoid about saving things. Like when I was working on a Word document or whatever, I would just save like after every keystroke almost, or every time I would stop typing, like after every word I'd save it. And I kind of use Git the same way. Like I'll do a little thing and then I'll like save it. And I'll do a little thing and I'll save it. It's almost like automatic. So I just don't think about it. I guess the other thing is psychologically, if I don't have it checked in, I kind of feel like, okay, now I have to remember to check it in, or whatever, or like if I lose it, have I put in too much? I don't know. So I was like, all right, well, I'll just do it like the easy way and just check in every version, right?
So do you write something useful for each of those messages, or are they just like code?
Nope. Well, if I'm working on one area of the code, I'll have like one message, and then if I work on something else, I'll have a different message. But I might have 50 commits like with the same message or something.
Okay. So that feels like it's maybe an extreme use of Git, unless maybe I'm sort of
Yes.
the minority here.
No, I think it's an extreme use of Git.
Okay.
I guess one of my views is like a really good tool shouldn't tell me how to use it. So, but
Okay, that's fair. Do you suppose there could be a tool that gave you a certain level of confidence that your history was being recorded? Well, actually, I guess that's a question first. Are you really intending to preserve all of that as history, or is it just a matter of making sure it's somewhere else other than the hard drive right in front of you, or the solid state drive?
yeah, that's a good question. I guess I'm using partly as a backup. I actually don't like Git. I don't like Git at all. I mean, it feels like maybe it's okay for like a multi-million line Linux kernel or something. Although at least one of my friends thinks it's not very good for that either. But yeah, I feel like it's way too heavyweight. If it weren't for GitHub, I would probably not use Git.
Well, I still use SVN, so I'm not going to judge you, but
So Nahal likes Git. Okay, so Nahal, tell us why Git's so great.
Yeah, so I take Git to like almost the extreme of. So I think it's better than the kernel. I think if you look at his Torvald's corpus, I think Git is more important than the kernel even. But what I feel is like if you so if you start looking at the underlying primitives, right? There's Git porcelain and there's Git plumbing. That's like the term that they use in their development process. So if you start looking at the plumbing of Git, there's like a few different concepts that they have that sort of make the magic work. And I feel like for things like, for instance, relational programming and like the search engines that the search stuff we're doing, the data structures that they use are fantastic. Like they're the data structures that they're very similar to persistent arrays and all the stuff that Clojure and Scala are using, except they just do it in C. And like once you learn how to take branches like quickly, so I think that's the main thing. It's like you can record all the history you want, but the first thing about Git, like when you transition from SVN, it's just learn to take branches. Once you start creating branches, then you kind of organize your work in a very it becomes clearer how you organize your work. So I don't know. I think Git is both an amazing piece of technology, but also really makes my coding a lot more organized.
I'll be the first to admit I don't have the faintest idea of how to use Git. I use it in an extremely naive fashion. It seems way too complicated. I don't understand it. So maybe that would be something we could do. No, seriously, there's like 10 zillion concepts, it feels like, in Git. I'm sure there aren't. I'm sure there are only a few concepts, but it feels like there are a million commands, and there's like, every time I want to do something, it's like, oh yeah, you need to set the rebase to freebase init.
Yeah, there's like 5 commands. There's 5 concepts. There are 5 concepts, I think 5 or 6. And like if you read the Pro Git book, if you just skip to the last 7 or 8 chapters, it sort of just describe exactly how the index is laid out, and that's really the important part. All the other stuff.
I don't want to read 7 or 8 chapters on Git.
It's important.
I guess it is. Okay, so we'll have to have a Git tutorial. I don't know how to think about Git. That's my problem. Okay, I'll tell you what system I really liked, and then you can make fun of me. I really liked. What was the thing Launchpad was based on? It was
Bazaar.
Bazaar. I like Bazaar because there was nothing to know, right?
Yeah.
And I could do 10,000 commits locally, and no one cared. So anyway, I don't understand. You have to teach me how to think about Git. Okay. Now the thing, darks. Okay, well that's anything based on quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
But I would actually be interested in learning about how to think about this stuff, right? Because I'm sure they're very powerful ideas in Git. I just don't, or darks. I just don't know how to think about them. I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to learn.
One way to think about it, though, is imagine you're doing parallel search, right? And these guys all have their own state, and eventually they need to reconcile the things that they found. Git ends up being a very good, the primitives that Git uses is very useful for creating scalable software across many different domains, including search. So I always thought that Git, the ideas in Git are actually really good.
Well, it's funny because my friend, the other Michael at Utah, he thinks that Git's data structures and algorithms suck. he thinks that there are actually way, way, way more efficient ways to do it than that.
That's probably true, actually. Like that part, but the thing is, that's always going to be true because what it's doing is very generic. But the concept, like, is I don't know, just being able to merge like many different streams of data, many streams of updates efficiently. It's quite cool. Anyway.
So it seems to me really conceptually clean, but the porcelain is awful. And I guess one of the things like that I really like in other systems, like what I really like about TiddlyWiki, which is what Will and I use now, is that conceptually it's just a wiki, right? And it really shouldn't matter which wiki I choose. But the porcelain is just so good. The interface is smooth enough that it means that I actually use it. Whereas I tried using VimWiki, which was kind of org mode like, I guess, and I just never really kind of used it because I had to remember kind of arcane commands and things like that. So it kind of stopped me from actually using it all the time. And that's something I don't like about Git, and something I don't like about a lot of other kind of developer tools that kind of don't have the right defaults in terms of interface.
They don't have the right defaults, and they presuppose so much knowledge that it's hard to get started, even if you're like a competent developer already.
For Git?
Well, Git does that a little bit, but just development tools in general. So many of them require you to know a lot more than you need to know to start. So like with Git, all you really need to know how to start is pull, push, and commit with a message. And then you can just Google how to clone the few times you have to do that. But so many of the guides are focused on these really awesome, really powerful things that it can also do that they seem to forget that when people first start, they need their hands held in a non-offensive way, I guess I would say.
Yeah, Elm does a really good job of like taking that philosophy of really easing people into things carefully. Like I guess his name is Evan, right? Like he makes it a very conscious choice to like explain the concepts in a very simple way in the beginning and let it become a much slower learning curve or a quicker learning curve, I guess.
Yeah, I'd love to see an Elm demo from someone. Maybe we can even invite Evan on if he'd be willing. But yeah, that's something I've heard about the Elm stuff, is that he really cares about those aspects. I was trying to learn Elm from that 7 more languages in 7 weeks, but it seemed like Elm had changed so much since the book came out that I was having trouble running the code.
He has videos, and his videos are actually really good. He's a very good speaker. I don't know if you've seen them.
Oh, can you put a link to that?
Yeah, I'll show you I'll put a few links. So IRC is the way to go.
Yeah, I think so. For things for posterity, I guess, that we can archive or whatever. Is all the IRC stuff sort of automatically archived, or do we have to like, copy it something?
I don't have it set up to automatically archive yet. I don't think. I can try and figure out how to get a bot for doing that. But
okay, cool. So I'm curious, and thanks, Bruce. I think you're right. So instead of like reading a big book on Git, talking to someone who has the right mental model, I think is the right thing to do. It's like when I was learning interpreters, right? I tried working through lots of books that would have me write an interpreter in C, and basically it was a calculator. But then I took Dan Friedman's course, and he taught me like in one class more than I ever learned from reading a whole bunch of books, right? So it was like, someone has the right mental model, they can show you something really cool. So yes, I'm happy to not read the 7 chapters, and to have you and Hall and everyone kind of like teach me the way to think about Git. But I like every time I try going back and get an old branch or something, like I end up nuking things and then like having to do another git clone at some point because I can't understand what the messages mean and stuff. Like I get so frustrated using Git. I really hate it. I really hate Git. So I want to learn. I want to learn how to think about Git where I'll love it. I just get very frustrated. It feels like super complicated. So who is the Dan of Git? I don't know. Hopefully Nahal or Bruce or someone. Yeah, we need the Dan Friedman of Git. can explain it to us in a clean way.
Yep.
Yes, I agree, Bruce. Knowing less is very powerful. So Nahal, I'm curious. Like, so obviously, you do lots of work and development or playing around with ideas all the time. Like, how do you keep track of that? Do you have notebooks, or you just keep it in your head, or do you have software you use to keep track of ideas?
I mostly try to keep it in my head, so it's not very helpful. And then what I end up doing is I'll have like a notebook where I just scribble, so I can't ever read what I just write, and that helps me remember. So I don't have a very good system, but I do like. What I've found is that pushing things up to GitHub, where GitHub knows how to render, so either org mode or Markdown, now knows how to do like these IPython notebooks. So I have a couple of private repos, whatever, but I'll push them up as notebooks, and being able to go to that is useful. But it's not optimal because you can't search, and like you're asking about search, that's really important. So I don't have a good system, so I would love to find one. Org mode seems not bad though.
Yeah, so the notebooks are something, that's an example of the sort of interactivity, right? And I know you've been playing around with Julia a lot. And
yeah, for me it's like
similar.
Yeah, it's like it's really useful to do these notebooks because I can see. I don't know. It's much like a REPL session, but quite often you can create charts. So if I'm doing something that involves a large amount of data, I can develop an algorithm. I can take a piece of data and I can visualize. I can visualize things more than just like a S expression or something like that. So I find the notebooks very helpful because of the data side. So that's the other place where I think interactive stuff will become more and more relevant. Is that in my workflow, what I find is that what happens is I have a huge chunk of data, and I want to load it into memory and then start writing algorithms on that data. And I want to interactively see the results. And so that's another place where not just in collaboration, but being able to work efficiently, doing things interactively is very helpful. Because it's too slow to like recompile and reload. Yeah. Recompiling is not the problem. Actually, reloading the data is the problem.
So the notebooks seem cool. I guess they still they could be more interactive, right? Like, I mean, if you compare them to List Machine or an Alto or something like that, there's still kind of pretty hard limits on what you can modify and what you can change, right? But
no, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, I guess, okay, so in some sense, maybe these aren't the most practical notions, but they're the coolest conceptually. Things like where, the application you're running in is written in the same language, right? And as the operating system and all that, and you can inspect any code. So in some sense,
you can do all of that in the notebook.
So you can actually look at the code for the notebook itself, like that implements the notebook, and change that dynamically. Like, can you change how the notebook itself behaves at runtime?
Okay, so I've done that, right? And it's not so easy, but yes, you can do that.
Is the notebook written in Python? Or is it in JavaScript, or what?
So the notebook is written in Python. I don't think that matters, to be honest.
Okay.
The Python layer is very minimalistic and kind of it's a simple protocol. And you can inject JavaScript into the notebook, so you can do kind of wild things that way. But that's not also a normal pattern. But let's say you're starting from an Emacs REPL, right? Like, so you're using Emacs and you like the REPL when you're hacking Scheme, right? So sure. that behavior you get pretty much straight off the bat from a notebook. And are you looking for something more than that? Because in addition to that, you get all the inspectability and mutatability that you get from a Emacs REPL, but you can also do different kinds of visualization. That's the way I would characterize a notebook.
Yeah, I guess Well, okay, so I shouldn't really pick on the notebooks any more than I pick on anything else. It's just, I guess that ultimately I like this idea of having like your mail client or whatever, right, written in a language and being able to dynamically like um, change it and stuff like that, right? Like it, or I don't know, all those sorts of things, right? This dream of having everything written in some language is super dynamic. You can change anything at runtime, and there's no difference between the operating system scheduler and your email client and the code that you're writing for whatever application you're developing, and it's all kind of like, interchangeable in some sense. You use the same tools, the same approach, everything, but
Yeah.
practice.
So what you want, so it doesn't quite exist, right? But I mean, conceptually, what happens is that you can think of it this way: you like start a Julia. Let's say we're dealing with Julia. So think of there's a few languages that now have notebooks on top of them. You start Julia, and you can start, you can run any program you want, a mail reader, whatever you've written in Julia, and then in that same session, you can launch a notebook that's talking to that same session. So you can use the notebook to hack your, let's say, mail reader that's running in Julia, but the stuff doesn't really work as well as you would like. Like it's not, there's like many problems with this stuff, but in theory, there's nothing that prevents you from doing what you want, just in the same way you could do it with Emacs.
Yeah.
I don't think Emacs, though, is really quite the experience that Will is talking about, though. I think it's sort of the experience of, you're in the mail client, you decide you want to change how something about it behaves, you go, edit the code on the mail client, or you inspect part of the window, you maybe change one of the properties on the window, then you get annoyed with the inspector, you inspect the inspector, you start hacking on the inspector while you were in the middle. It's basically a meta-circular yak shaving in a way, but it's a lot of fun feeling that the entire system is right there in front of you in a uniform system that you can bend to your will in any way, at any level, at any time.
Yeah. And one system that I think gets close to that actually is so because of the way everything is written in Objective-C and Macs, there's something called fscript where you can just like you can just start hacking pretty much any program on your Mac and start sending, you can start changing the user interface and so forth.
Right.
It's pretty useful.
Is this sort of like a modern AppleScript type thing?
Yeah, it's lower level than AppleScript, but it's it kind of exposes a lot more of the details. But it's similar.
So it's kind of a small talky environment on top of the Objective-C environment.
Really?
Yeah.
AppScript.
Yes.
It's not a great language, unfortunately, but it's there. You can do kind of something similar if you wanted to hack. Like, it's actually quite useful. I've had to use it a few times, and I don't know how else I would have dealt with the issues I had to deal with.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'd definitely like to look at it. Well, and Brian and Bruce, I mean, I think one of the reasons I like list machines and Smalltalk so much is I don't have to use them every day. Right? I mean, let's be honest. I love the ideas of Smalltalk, right? And to me, Alan Kay is like one of the great innovators in the history of computing. And I love the Alto and all that stuff, right? Every time I try to use a Smalltalk system, I get frustrated very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I find it's like, even on modern hardware, it's just way, way, way slow. The user interfaces are kind of awkward to use, and the systems are really huge. You have to know an awful lot to do anything. And I guess I would be willing, and I actually am trying to learn Smalltalk for real and learn the systems for real, but it's like it's going to take a long time, right, to really understand that stuff. And I don't know of any Smalltalk implementations, including Squeak or Pharaoh or whatever, that kind of really feel up to snuff. It feels like they kind of are still stuck in the 70s. The ideas are, I think, timeless and really brilliant. The implementations feel awkward to use. So, I think there's always this kind of nostalgia of like, if we only had Lisp machines and Altos, like everything would be perfect. But I'm sure if you complain about that too. But I think there was like a notion of dynamicism that I think is lacking from most systems. Yeah.
I think one of the things that frustrates me about living in that world is that it's fun, but it's also easy to shoot yourself in the foot because what you're doing, what you're changing, is not separated from the environment that you're changing it with. That was the comment I made in the chat about living in the dirty world of no phase separation. So you can go down sort of two separate paths with that. One is to say, well, we're just going to have separate compilation and a nice clean hierarchy of phases and declare the top level to be broken, and you end up with Racket. And Racket is great. I love Racket. I do a lot with Racket. But you also then, I feel I'm still missing that dynamicism in Racket as well. It's sort of been dispensed with everything else. And that's a shame because I think the contract system is sort of the kernel of the idea for how we could enable that sort of dynamic system, that sort of reflective system, but still allow us to do things without shooting ourselves in the feet, in the sense that if we can sort of detect that something that we've changed is not fulfilling its contract obligations, we can, I don't know, maybe roll back to a version that did work, for instance.
So can you imagine something along the lines of Lisp Machine or Alto, Smalltalk, or whatever that was based on these contracts? That would be, or maybe something a little less. I guess the other problem is you can find yourself trying to boil the ocean before you do anything, right? It's
right.
Like the classic example of someone who wants to write a video game. So first they need a framework, and they don't like the framework, so they decide to build their own. And then they need a rendering engine, so they're going to write that. And then they need a programming language for the rendering engine, so they decide to do that. And 5 years later, they have nothing, right? So, but is there something maybe smaller, more interesting? I guess this is also where Michael and I have been, we've been kind of focused on this idea of, well, how could we, organize things like our research notes, our plans, and share those and things like that. Something maybe that goes beyond TiddlyWiki. And maybe use that as a focus for some of these ideas. Something that's interactive and allows people to share and is very dynamic, but has maybe more limited scope to begin with. But do you think you could do something like that based on contracts, and what would that look like?
It's an interesting question. I'd say contracts protect things, right? That's sort of the goal of contracts. And so I guess if what you're searching for is sort of that bottomless, I'll call it, environment where everything is reflective and is there in front of you, then that's where I'd say, I think the contracts idea could be applied. The type of system you're describing, I'm not sure. I don't know that I'd quite apply it necessarily. I'd say one of the other value you get out of contracts is that they allow you to have disparate notions of truth embedded in the same runtime because each portion protects itself. So one classic example of that then is typed Racket and untyped Racket. And each of them has sort of a different notion of truth in the sense that typed Racket's truth is that my procedure, which is type integer to string, will only ever be given an integer, and untyped Racket's version of truth is obviously not that. But the contracts at the boundary between them enable the two to live in the same shared environment, and so that might be another place where, in a scheme for organizing information and perhaps runnable programs, that the idea might be applicable.
So I guess maybe going back to a bigger question, or an earlier question is, does it seem correct to think that, more interactive environments for programming or more interactive computing and ways of manipulating, storing, sharing information and knowledge, that they go together, or maybe those are two totally different things. I mean, Michael and I think, have this feeling that they should go together, but maybe that's not correct.
I'm probably the wrong person to ask because I don't take notes. I've never taken notes.
You just keep everything in your head.
Yes.
That's the way to do it if you can, but it's not so good for sharing also, right? I mean, there are some disadvantages to it.
Yeah, it's not a great way, and I think I think the connection there is pretty intuitive. I think one of the things that concerns me is basically, are we up against a wall in terms of our ability? I don't necessarily want to use the word productivity because I don't want to go down the whole 10x nonsense path, but is our ability to work with ever more complex systems not growing because of our lack of ability to effectively use the machine to extend our ability to think about those systems? And I think, I sort of put forth some evidence for the proposition. I think, in general, systems complexity has not been well managed over time. Highly complex systems are still very difficult to work with. The number of people working on them tends to grow as a factor of a square or more of the complexity of the system itself, or at least in terms of the size of the system. And generally speaking, things get fragile and brittle whenever we try and build big systems. And I think our computers are great examples of that. I think they're still far too fragile and brittle and have all sorts of problems. And Hangouts crashed on me when I was trying to join this, and all that wonderful fun stuff. So yeah, we need ways of sort of extending our brains onto the machine, and that means incorporating in our thought processes, and that means both storage and interactivity.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess this is the idea behind the Viewpoints research steps towards reinvention of programming. I don't know if you've seen that. There's an NSF grant.
No, I haven't.
Five-year grant that Alan Kay and the VPRI folks got. And the idea was, instead of having 100 million lines of code, how much of the computing could you do in like 20,000 lines of code? Could you have an operating system and languages and compilers and all those tools and applications for at least like kind of the main productivity sorts of applications you might think of for standard personal computing, spreadsheets, word processors, so forth? Could you fit all that in 20,000 lines of code? And they think the answer is yes. And that project is actually over. It seems like they played around with some interesting ideas there. But that's very much a reaction, right, to that level of complexity. And maybe 20,000 isn't the right number. Maybe it's 100,000 or something like that. But their idea was you should be able to be more, multiple orders of magnitude smaller than the largest systems, than the systems we're currently running on our desktops, and we should be able to make it something where hopefully, the reason they picked 20,000 lines was that's apparently the size of a novel or something like that, something that you potentially over years could learn those 20,000 lines quite well and play around with it, right? So that's a fairly radical approach to trying to manage this complexity.
I'm skeptical, and in particular because the large systems that I was having in mind were not necessarily, the not just the computing that we use every day. It's the systems we build with that I have in mind as well. It's the airplanes and the spaceships and all those other fun things. Those have grown in complexity too, and I think again still our ability to manipulate and work with that complexity has decreased. As the system grows, we fit ever less of it into our heads, we communicate ever more poorly about it, and the systems as a whole work more poorly, except in the areas in which there's been obviously some technological advancement, but they don't ever feel as robust as what they replaced.
But you know, this reminds me, I guess, a little bit about something Michael and I were talking about over dinner tonight. Was that many of the very best programmers I know, if not most of them, you know, their main debugging tool is printf, right? um, and and similarly for like things like organizing information and brainstorming and stuff like that, you know, I don't see most people using really sophisticated computer tools. I see them using whiteboard and notebooks or keeping it in their head, right? And I guess my question is, well, does that just mean fundamentally that that's actually just much easier to communicate verbally or just write stuff down? Like Dijkstra refused to ever learn LaTeX, right? Because like, well, I can write anything down on a piece of paper. Why should I limit myself to what tech can handle, right? Or does it just mean that the tools we have and our ways of using those tools just aren't sophisticated enough? I don't know.
I think debugging is a good example. What people are doing when they're doing the printf debugging, I think, is they're trying to form and refine and test a hypothesis. And existing debuggers don't work in that mental model necessarily at all, which is to say that by the time you actually get the thing breakpointed at the point where your hypothesis is relevant, you might as well have just stuck a printf in there and printed out the value anyway, because that's all you're going to do with the debugger. Rarely is tracing through helpful in actually forming a hypothesis. But again, I think that's a tool problem. I think there could be better tools here. I'm sure there's been research done. I'm not aware of it. But we're not using them.
Does anyone here use debuggers in what they think is a sophisticated way? Or anyone disagree with like the use of debuggers or utility of it?
I find debuggers like extremely helpful. So I don't. This in the hall. So I write unit tests and other kinds of tests, but almost always, like I have some critical piece of code. The first thing I do is I trace through it, and actually inspect all the state that I possibly can. So like that's something I've always done since like I started coding. I think is different than some of like the friends that I have that are very good programmers. But again, I just find like the debugger is so useful, not for certain languages, but like when I have to deal with either Java or C or something like that, just stepping through a program with a debugger is like insanely useful. I don't know.
So you do it when you're writing the code, just to understand
like what I'll do is I'll write a piece of code, I'll maybe write a test, or what I'll do is I'll just write an example, and I'll spend like 15 or 20 minutes actually stepping through the code very, very slowly and just checking state everywhere. And I find that there's formal verification, there's sort of unit testing, and then there's this kind of weird thing that I do. I actually think it's just so useful. Like I feel like I know the code so well after I've seen it go through, like step through it, and then I just move on. So I don't like writing code that involves these languages, but when I have to do it, that's how I sleep. I just gotta step through it.
What languages in particular are you doing that with?
Just C, C++, and Java. So anything that would be, a more interesting language. The debugging tools aren't there, right? So GDB is probably like GDB or LLDB, whatever. They're great for those languages, and then other languages just don't have similar. They don't have a great debugging experience. So then I do whatever's appropriate for that language. But for like the low-level stuff, it's really just so much easier for me to just step through the entire thing, and then have. But stepping is not important as actually expecting all the state across a large number of variables. That ends up being quite helpful.
So are you doing this for debugging, or just so you understand the code that you just wrote, regardless of whether or not you find errors in it?
So I just always do it. So it's just like some people always write with a REPL, and that's what I do in like more higher level languages. Is if I'm doing Scheme, I just have a REPL. Like I can't write code in Scheme without a REPL. So I just can't write Java code or C code without having the debugger. So like all parts of my development process involve stupid the debugger, right? Because
Well, that's a very interesting way of doing it, though, right? Because you're not like
and the thing
debugging
is-
in a traditional sense. You're trying to build up a mental model.
And then the other thing I've learned to love is like core dump files. Like, so when you're doing something in C and C++, like most times people see a core dump and they just like groan. Actually, like a core dump is like a wildly amazing piece of forensic evidence. So it's just, I don't know. I've definitely started to love the debugger.
Have you seen RR?
No, I don't know what that is actually.
Okay, I pasted a link. RR actually records an execution trace of a binary, and then when you're debugging, you have the ability to basically step forwards or backwards or restart from the beginning for that particular execution trace deterministically.
That's cool. Yeah. I've seen someone try that for the JVM.
And Bruce says that things like RR are more common for the game industry as well for deterministic replay. Yeah, so that's really interesting how you use that debugger now. Actually, I would actually really like to see how you debug a core dump, by the way, because I've been one of those people like core dump. Well, I'm done. Right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's
really simple. In fact, Eclipse has like a version of their debugger that's just sort of like you just type a command and it just opens up a GUI debugger. That's probably the best way that you look at a core dump file.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess one of the things that's interesting to explore is like I'm sure that the tools we have I'm not using very well, but I also feel like I'm not the only person not using the tools very well that we have. So I would like to kind of learn how to really use the tools we do have, and then maybe explore how we could go beyond that.
I think the stepping thing. Now that you're describing it, I realize that yes, I do a lot of that. But I think Will mentioned it earlier. I do a lot of embedded development, and so the stepping thing is sort of more important there because once things go wrong, usually all bets are off. And the other problem is that usually I have to compile with optimization just to get things to actually fit. And so as a result, GDB, as far as inspecting state, I can rarely do it because I usually just see value optimized out, which is not terribly helpful.
Right.
But being able to just step through and say, okay, I seem to be in a good state. I ended up in a bad state. How did I get there? Is something I end up doing a lot of, unfortunately. We try and debug as much as we possibly can on the host before we jump onto the target. But there, as far as tracing and stuff, there's actually this whole set of somewhat ugly macros that give us the ability to trace, function calls and various trace points throughout the program without actually having to run under GDB. Tracing is great, obviously, but when we're doing it, it's another form of printf debugging.
David and Greg, do you have any comments to make about any of the tools you use or would like to use, or how you keep track of notes or ideas or things like that? Greg, when you're learning Go strategies, things like that. I mean, that's a form of managing information and so forth, right? Or, do you have specialized tools for that? Sure. So I guess Greg's chatting only right now. I guess so. So from a broader standpoint, right? There are things like I've been trying to learn how to become better at StarCraft. There's like surprising amount to know about learning to become good at StarCraft. So I've had trouble even just like organizing those relatively modest resources. Greg says he mostly uses text files that he pushes to GitHub. Yep, I kind of do that also. Brian asks if anyone remembers Google Wave. Someone else had mentioned Google Wave earlier.
Oh.
Yeah, Daniel had mentioned that.
I must not have been on when that was mentioned.
Yeah, I guess we got the two chats going on in the IRC also, which, by the way, I'm not following the IRC chat at all. So anyone who wants to sort of recap interesting things going on in either of the chats, feel free to do so. Yeah, Greg's posted a ton of links in IRC. Okay, so we'll have to make sure we can archive all that. Yeah. Well, I guess kind of changing gears a little bit from just talking about ideas and so forth. Yeah, Daniel said if we only had some sort of collaborative knowledge sharing environment. That's right, right? See, this is part of the problem, right? We don't really have particularly good tools even for doing these hangouts or these, okay, right? Like with okay, let me go on a rant for a second, right? With the mini Canron hangouts that I've been doing. So we have a wiki that no one uses. We have an IRC channel that like no one goes to. We would do the Google Hangouts, but that was very awkward to have multiple people trying to share things at once. Even as tonight, right, you have this issue where some people, they either don't have a mic or they don't have a camera, or there are people around that can't turn the mics on. There's no way to easily share multiple repls. The Google Chat isn't archived, so you can't see Google Chat afterwards, even on the YouTube video. And then there are things like, I have to be very, very careful, I learned, about how I publicize a link to a Hangout, because there are lots of pretty good trolls now. Like, the trolls have gotten pretty good. One troll can shut down any Hangout easily. There are only 10 people you can have max in a Hangout at once. There are like all sorts of problems, and only one person's space is up at once. You can't have something kind of split screeny. You can't have something where like a couple of people are interacting in an easy way, so forth. So I mean, there are lots and lots of issues here. So anyway, that's an example of some of the frustration I've had. But anyway, sort of going back to the main point, what Michael and I would like to do is not just talk about ideas. We would actually like to have people experiment with things and hack on things and so forth. And one idea I had was we could have something sort of like Scheme community has these SURFy, scheme requests for information, or sorry, for implementation, where someone has an idea for a Scheme feature. They come up with a SURFy describing it, and they're hoping that implementers of Scheme systems will add this to their system. So one thing we could potentially try would be having something like SURFys or something metaphorically kind of like that, but maybe a sort of someone's vision of a tool they would like to build or an idea they'd like to explore, and have like a little write-up or a little video or a little explanation on a Hangout or something like that, saying what they'd like to do, and if they can attract other people, maybe have 2 or 3 people like play around with this idea, or they can do it solo if they want, but it'd be fun to try to understand what they're trying to explore. And then over time, see what these prototypes look like or tools, and try using them, see how they work, and over time get feedback from multiple people interested in these ideas. And it'd be really cool if we could actually shift our work to use some of these tools. I mean, maybe we still use Google Hangouts for part of it, or we use Skype or who knows. We can use existing infrastructure, but it'd be cool to actually be using, try to explore these ideas and have real users and real feedback and so forth, and lots of sharing of ideas. Brian says, clearly you need to raise seed funding to build a wonderful solution. Yes. Yes. Actually, one of the things Michael and I have been thinking about is, maybe at some point we could submit like an NSF grant having to do with this, building this infrastructure. But, the way funding works these days is, for something like NSF, unless you actually have some preliminary data or some implementation stuff or whatever, probably aren't going to get funded. So, it actually would be cool to either try to get some funding or work with other groups, like groups at UCLA or VPRI or whatever. But, also I have confidence that, we've got good people here, and we probably do some cool exploration on our own. There is a lot of talent that would come to the mini Canron Hangouts, for example, had a lot of very, very good programmers, and you know, I think we could potentially explore some really cool ideas. But anyway, so that's something I was curious what people thought about in terms of, hacking on things, or, having something like a request for implementation, or whatever, pairing up. What do people think about, building prototypes or whatever, or should we try to work on one tool, or or should we mostly keep it sort of metaphorical and talk about old systems, and maybe have just those folks who are interested in building tools try building stuff? Like what might people be interested in doing going further? Anyone? Okay, Daniel says, defining the problem seems like the most challenging aspect of this. Yeah, so, I guess there's always a tension, right? So Michael and I had this idea of, we played around with some ideas of how we might have a tool to help us organize information and research ideas and so forth and share those. So I think Michael and I want to do some hacking on that. But hopefully, we could have multiple people exploring multiple ideas and multiple problems. The problems that are of most interest to you or most pressing. And it doesn't have to be solving like all of interactive computing or like that. It could be a much smaller thing you want to investigate, or some area of so like Daniel said, the trolls are actually an interesting topic, right? How do you build a system that's robust against hostile users, right? So that's a smaller problem than all of interactive computing or organizing information and so forth, but that would be an interesting thing to explore. And also, it may actually be possible to build up fairly usable, fairly decent infrastructure based on existing tools, right? Just, I know Google Hangouts allows for add-ons and things like that. Emacs is very extensible, things like that. So, obviously web browsers are extensible in many ways. So it may be that, or TiddlyWiki is extensible. Maybe it doesn't have to be like reinventing a whole bunch of new tools. It may be a combination of using old tools in a new way and, cobbling together some infrastructure from existing tools in a way that's like just more usable. That might be easier to do than trying to build something from scratch. But anyway, that's one thing that we were hoping we could get into, after a couple of hangouts, that people would have ideas that they might want to explore. The other things that we're interested in is doing demos, people demoing whatever they think is really cool and talking about ideas, and then maybe talking about history, like having some readings that people are interested in, or videos to watch for older systems or existing systems that maybe we could have things to talk about. So of course, there's that famous essay, "As We May Think," which is the title "As We May Thunk" is a pun off of. And if you don't know, thunk is also a name for a procedure of no arguments, like in Lisp. So we could also look at some of those old writings and in systems and videos and those sorts of things, and talk about that and try to explore more about the history of these old systems. And also, once again, I think it is important to kind of avoid fetishizing too much these old systems, right? It's like, it's really easy for me to say, hey, if I had a Lisp machine today, it would solve all my problems, but I'm sure I'd be frustrated with Lisp machine too, based on all the side effecting and shooting yourself in the foot and all that. So anyway, so that's something to think about. We don't have to decide right now what exactly we do, but something to think about for the future. Michael, do you have anything you'd like to share?
Well, we've been talking about TiddlyWiki a fair bit. or at least you and I have mentioned it multiple times, but we haven't actually shown it off. So just like we had an org mode demo, we could do a TiddlyWiki demo.
Awesome. You want to give a demo?
I think you use it better than I do, so I would suggest that maybe you give the demo because yours is a bit more organized. But
oh dear, I think you should give the demo. You're the one that told me about it. I've talked too much already.
Okay, I'll try and give a demo.
All right.
Let's see. Got to remember how to share my screen. All right. Can people see?
Yep.
Cool. So this is TiddlyWiki. I've got it set up. Right now it's the Node.js version of it instead of the single-page browser version, which is also kind of cool because it's Will and I like quines because we like miniKanren, and miniKanren can generate quines. And TiddlyWiki, in kind of its original form, was a quine. It was a single web page, single HTML file with embedded JavaScript that contained both the code and the data. And you'd kind of modify it in the browser by doing things, creating new pages, new tiddlers. Each of these boxes is a tiddler. And then you would save out that file, and it would kind of reproduce itself, including all of the embedded code that actually makes it work. So that was kind of cool. I like working with it in this kind of flat file way. So there's actually a Node.js server running on my computer, and browsers connecting to that and downloading tiddlers from that. And each tiddler is just a .tad file in a folder that I currently have in Dropbox. I could put it in GitHub or whatever. I think Will puts his in GitHub. And what's really nice about it is that I can have more than one page open at a time. So I can have, I think they call this a river of tiddlers. So that's kind of nice, and I can very easily create a new page and just kind of start typing without even figuring out what the title for it is. So mine for this this Hangout is this one. I haven't titled it yet, but I can just kind of start. And it's kind of like having that scratch buffer, but then you can kind of go back, give it a name, and save it, and maybe add a tag or two. I'll create the thunk tag. And it also has a really good search. So if I look for anything miniKanren related, it'll all just pop up here. And that's something I like better than trying to use something like VimWiki or something like that. And it's also Ajax, so as compared to using like a personal hosted media wiki or something, it's really kind of satisfying that way. And one of the other really cool things that Will and I have been intending to do but haven't really done, as you will see if you go to my website, which is currently completely empty, is we've got it set up so that we can just kind of add a tag to any tiddler, and it'll kind of push out onto our website, which is just kind of a TiddlyWiki kind of clone of the subset of pages that have a certain tag. Yeah. So what's kind of frustrating about this, though, is that Will and I both work on kind of the same things. We work on miniKanren stuff, and this is actually a tiddler that originally came from Will's TiddlyWiki, and he exported it using this export tiddler functionality, and I dropped it into mine. But we can't really kind of share versions of that page back and forth between our wikis. And really, ideally, we'd probably like to have a wiki that combined some of our own stuff plus some of the shared project stuff, and kind of push things into the shared project content really easily. And also because it's web-based, it's not really integrated with my system in the same way that kind of the org mode stuff was. That was really cool that you could just kind of run a code block and have that run a bash script or whatever. But here, since it's in my browser, I can't really do any of that stuff, which is disappointing. So if I had kind of a networked version of this and something that could actually run code on my computer. And the other complaint I guess I have is that I have to manually tag things, and I tend to not. I tend to be kind of lazy. I tend to just use it as saving a bunch of scratch buffers, which I can at least search later, but I never really end up organizing it. So something that would be really cool is if, as I was using it, it kind of recognized usage patterns, and it recognized that, I look at these pages together and maybe they're related. So having kind of an information organization system that can learn from how I use it, not kind of at the big scale like Google does, but at the small scale of kind of my personal usage, would be really cool. So, yeah.
So why haven't you made the videos, made your tiddlers, put them on your website?
Because I don't end up putting the effort into them to kind of making them the finished piece of writing that would be comprehensible to someone else. Most of them are just kind of, scratch buffers or blocks of code with no explanation. And I keep telling myself that I'm going to go back to flesh some of those out into blog posts or whatever, and it hasn't happened.
Okay. Yeah, same here. Like, I think I put up one tiddler or something. I guess, I like TiddlyWiki quite a bit. I've made probably even more tiddlers than Michael, even though Michael's been using it longer. The things I like about it is it is very, very lightweight. Like Michael was showing, it's like, it takes almost no time. One thing I like about it is that if I think, well, I should really write a note down, if I have my laptop open, then the time to actually create a tiddler is like almost nothing. So it's like very, very low overhead. So the amount of time it would take for me to reach for my notebook and stuff like that, I can start a new tiddler. And I think that's really important in terms of my actually using it. So that's something I like. It's very, very lightweight. It's very free form. It doesn't make you do things one way or versus another. It's got a nice UI and all that. I guess the main things I find kind of annoying are there's no way to easily share, like Michael was talking about, and that seems like a real bummer when you want to do something collaborative. And there's like ways to put stuff up on the web, like Michael was showing, but that also has some issues. Like, if I'm making my own notes, just like Michael, they may not be very understandable without a lot of context. And furthermore, I might have some private notes or some notes about research I'm doing with someone else that they might not want to make public yet, or maybe I don't want to make public yet, or whatever. And so I have to be very careful then about what I would put online, right? Or put on, it might just, maybe someone doesn't want to be talked about online or whatever. So that's also kind of like an issue. And that's, I think, more of a fundamental issue. It's not a problem with TiddlyWiki, but the way TiddlyWiki works, I don't know that it has a good way of kind of keeping the private information and the public information. I was afraid that I would accidentally put a public tag on something that was maybe should be private, or that I just wouldn't put in enough public tags to be useful. So, but TiddlyWiki is super extensible, so that actually could be something to play with, and try to have a sharing collaborative version of TiddlyWiki could be kind of cool. And then, like I was talking about before, Michael and I have talked about ways to do things like machine learning based on the tiddlers you have available and so forth, and that might be a cool way to learn for TiddlyWiki or some system to learn what things go together. Oh yeah, so here's another annoying thing about Google Chat, by the way. Google Hangouts. Like, at least under Firefox, after a while, the Google Chat bar starts acting up. I don't know if there's like a memory leak or what, space leak or whatever. Yeah, so that's TiddlyWiki, which is pretty cool. So Bruce, I found it interesting that you like Dylan. Dylan's a very interesting language, a very dynamic language. So at some point you want to talk about that or give any sort of demo or whatever, that would be really neat. Or talk about ideas or inspiration from Dylan. I know some people who are real Dylan aficionados. Has a cool macro system and all that. Yeah. David's here. Now, of course, David did that really cool veneer system for Mini Canron. David, are you still interested in making that like a more general scheme system? Definitely, cool. Yeah. Yeah, so I definitely invited David because he did some really cool hacking with the Mini Canron stuff, and I'd be curious what sort of things that you could come up with, or assuming you're interested in the space. Turn the camera off as I blow my nose again. Having a cold sucks. Okay. Bruce says, we don't have a good way to represent Mini Canron and Dylan right now. Huh, I'm surprised by that. I would think that the macros would make that easy. That'd be something worth looking at. Yeah, okay. So, is there anything else people want to talk about, I guess? About coming up on 2.5 hours. We don't have to go 3 hours if we don't want to. Is there anything people would otherwise like to share? Or, I guess one question is, what would you like to do in the future? There are a bunch of things we can do, right? So there are all sorts of readings, there are all sorts of videos and things like that about classic interactive computing systems. There's the mother of all demos, there's the As We May Think, there's all the Xerox PARC work, there's other Douglas Engelbart work besides the mother of all demos, on and on and on, right? And then there's sort of contemporary work going on, Brett Victor's stuff, the Reinventing Programming stuff by BPRI, and things like Light Table and TiddlyWiki and whatever. And one thing we could try to do is have people come on as guests, have the TiddlyWiki developers come on, talk about things, right? Or invite someone from BPRI on, talk about what they have in mind, so forth. Or we can also get into hacking, or we can mix that up. Brian says, I think if the Hangouts are going to be a thing, it might be good to collect ideas for things to cover offline on the group maybe, and then set sort of an agenda. Yeah, we could definitely do that. So that would be one thing we could do is, have some readings or videos or whatever for people to look at. Bruce likes that also. And so we could have this as kind of a seminar, as a way of discussing interesting ideas, things that people care about. And that could also tie into having guests. It could also tie into inspiration for things we want to explore or hacking on. So one of the lessons I think of looking at the history of interactive computing is to realize that people have had very interesting ideas on how to interact with computing and how to organize information and things like that for a very long time, right? So, I think having a better understanding of these older ideas would be really cool. And also another thing is, trying to understand the tools we have, how to use those better. So, there could be mixture of demos and things like that. So one thing we could do is, have like a reading or a video or something like that to talk about. And we could also have people sign up for demos or whatever. And we could also have some guests. And so Brian's idea of an agenda sounds good. So maybe we can have something where people can sign up. And I don't know, dare I say a wiki or something? I don't know. I hope we can have a wiki that people would actually use. So Bruce says, this is Wednesday morning here for me, so it cuts into my day. Sure. Want to be respectful of that. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, I know this isn't the most convenient time for people in Europe, for example. I guess that's another thing we can investigate is what times and days work best for people. But yeah, so maybe what we can do is we can send out an email, maybe have a wiki or something like that, have something for signups, and see what demos people be willing to do, and list some topics to talk about. Maybe we can just pick one for next time, like the Van Averbush's As We May Think. That might be a good starting point. The MEMEC system and all that, and go from there. How does that sound to people?
Am I unmuted now?
Yeah.
My thought would be it'd be nice maybe to sort of mix it up with any tweak a little bit too. So you might have, say, a classic paper, reading, or video that you want to go over, but also then maybe throw a demo in there too, and maybe have a little hacking time based on that too. Unless you want to keep these short, but I don't know that there's any real reason to do that.
So for each hangout have like a few different things going on?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. That's sort of what I had in mind, and
Okay.
gives some variety and makes it as interactive as possible. And that's the way, if someone doesn't have a chance to read something or watch a video or whatever, they can still get something out of both the conversation and the demos and that kind of thing. And then hopefully, like I said, that will lead to some ideas for hacking and experimentation and so forth. And also, in addition to the demos, I think things like, trying to understand better how to use the tools we have. Like, what's the right way to think about Git? What's the right way to do something like debug a core dump, right? So Nahal could teach us that, because I don't really know how to do that. So yeah, like better learning how to use these tools. If people are interested in learning TiddlyWiki, right, or using TiddlyWiki for organization, we could talk about kind of how you use that tool in an interesting way. So that's also part of it. Learning to use our tools more sophisticated in a more sophisticated manner. Like, so maybe I don't have to do 10,000 Git commits, right? I'd be interested to learn better how what's the right way to do it, or how to think about forking in Git and things like that. Forking in Git has always scared me. I don't really know how to manage that very well. So yeah, so we can have a mixture of those things, and hopefully at some point soon, maybe have some ideas people are willing to hack on. And of course, people don't have to hack on it during the Hangouts, right? It could be more like, well, if people are interested in that, they can go off and pair, and if they want to show off at some point what they've done as a demo or talk about the ideas that they're exploring, then we can do that during a Hangout. It doesn't have to be hacking during this time. So, yeah, I think we can try that. So maybe we can set up a wiki, and send out an email pointing to that, and have people sign up for things that they'd be willing to demo, and papers or videos that they'd like to explore, or systems that they think are interesting, or ideas they have for hacking, and just go from there. Does that sound good for folks? Yep. Cool. All right. Good. Daniel asked, are we planning on keeping the same time for next week? That's a good question. What do people think? They like this time? I mean, basically the main reason we picked this time was to protect the weekend. Because not everyone wants to do Hangouts on the weekend. I mean, I was doing the mini Canron Hangouts on Sunday afternoon, Salt Lake time, which worked well for some people, but not so well for others. But there sort of is no good time zone, right, on the web, because anytime you pick will make it harder or easier for other people around the world. But okay, so it sounds like this time maybe works well enough for people. Yeah, so some people won't be able to use the mic very easily. Well, the other thing is we could potentially have it move around a little bit, so, sometimes do Wednesdays, but if that turns out to be a problem, maybe have some other times that are more convenient for a different set of people. But I suspect for right now, maybe just doing this next week would be the same. Would be fine. And let's see. So another thing I would like to do, by the way, is get in the habit of, or first I'll try to get this to be self-sustaining in the sense that if I can't make it or if Michael can't make it, that we have a way to to run these things. So like I travel a fair amount, Michael travels also, so no reason that we have to be around for all these. If there's some reason we can't make it, I think it'd be good to have it anyway. And also, just if someone can't make it because they're busy or whatever, that's fine. They can tune in another time or watch the video or whatever. So that's another thing I'd like to figure out how to do. All right. Yeah. Anything else? Michael, do you have anything else to add?
I think we can call it for this week and try and organize offline if people want to come up with the papers that they want to look at, demos they would be interested in giving, and particularly any kind of hacking projects that people would like a partner to work on. Post that kind of stuff to the mailing list. That'd be great.
Yeah. So should we? Do you think a wiki is the right technology for organizing that?
I don't know. Start with the mailing list and maybe start from that.
Okay. At least a link off as We May Thunk site would be nice. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll have to figure it. I mean, I guess we'll start with the way we always do it. Just cobble together a bunch of tools, mailing list, maybe at some point a wiki, IRC, Google Hangouts, right? Twitter. We're definitely living in this world where we got like a bunch of. I guess it's the Unix philosophy, right?
Yeah.
Get a bunch of tools for different things and can combine them, kind of, sort of. All right, cool. Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you for the folks who didn't have a working mic. And if you have anything in chat, sorry I wasn't keeping up with that very well. If you have anything you said in the Hangouts chat, it's going to be lost for posterity unless you also put it in the IRC chat. So
I'll grab all the Hangouts chat and the IRC and try and figure out a way to
do a merge or something. Okay, cool. Yeah. So thanks a lot, everyone. It's first time is always a little discombobulated, but I think talked about some interesting things, and hopefully next time we'll have a couple topics to talk about, and maybe a reading or a video to watch. So, and we have lots of things that we can play with at that point, and think maybe of things you'd like us to talk about, things you'd be willing to demo, and so forth. All right. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to stop the broadcast. If people want to hang out for a few minutes and talk, that's cool. Okay, later.